Hello, my love. I feel awkward. But okay, here's the book. Yeah. I don't know. Let me try and find the thing. It just says to wife features. So I don't know what that means, but you're my wife, so sure. In my head, we're married. Anyways. Okay, Monday. Tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pooh? B-U-W? Pooh? Were standing at the bar of the Anchor. You know what we would be doing right now if we were all alligators? Asked tall Mr. Hughes, who had hardly spoken about anything but alligators for 3 consecutive evenings. He had been alligators this and alligators that. No, mumbled Mr. Pooh, looking... Pew? No, mumbled Mr. Pugh, looking but at the same time not looking at a row of horse brasses on the far side of the room. Short Mr. Hughes was staring in the direction of the pewter mugs that were hanging from one of the beams behind the bar. He didn't say anything, but he turned down the corners of his mouth and shook his head. Tall Mr. Hughes drew himself up to his full height, even allowing his heels to rise a little off the ground. Despite his name, he wasn't particularly tall. Just a bit taller than short Mr. Hughes, who wasn't particularly short. They were just an inch or two either side of average, and it was Mr. Pugh, with his pipe and his big black beard, who was the shortest of the three by some distance. Deciding he had kept them in suspense for long enough, tall Mr. Hughes finally revealed his latest alligator fact. We would be, he said, hibernating. Oh, said Mr. Pugh, his eye at last focusing on the horse brasses. They seemed particularly shiny, and he half wondered whether they had been polished since the last time he had paid attention to them. He had no idea when that would have happened. Short Mr. Hughes carried on, staring in the direction of the pewter mugs. He turned down the corners of his mouth and nodded, running the fingers of his left hand over his bristly gray mustache. It's winter, you see, clarified tall Mr. Hughes, his rich baritone filling the room, and they hibernate in the winter. He stared at his drink for a while, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Do alligators? He lowered his heels and reached for his drink. The silence that followed was broken when the bottle's refrigerator's thermostat clicked and sent it rattling and rumbling into life. It was a lot louder than it ought to have been. That fridge needs looking at, and said short Mr. Hughes. Tall Mr. Hughes and Mr. Pugh nodded, but neither made any step to move the conversation away from alligators and toward refrigerator maintenance. These had been long evenings. Sometimes tall Mr. Hughes would state the obvious, telling them that the alligators are, at least for all intents and purposes, carnivores, or that even though they were crocodilian, they weren't actual crocodiles. Other times, he cleared up gray areas, like whether or not they had laid eggs. Short Mr. Hughes and Mr. Pugh were finally sure that alligators did lay eggs, but neither of them would have put money on it, mainly because they weren't gambling men, but also because they weren't particularly bothered either way. They had more than their fill of the subject. Their glazed eyes betrayed this, but tall Mr. Hughes didn't seem to notice. Drifting back into consciousness, he carried on where he had left off. And come the spring, he said, over the erratic thrum of the refrigerator, we would start to become... He paused before the grand revelation and drew himself up to his full height before looking around to make sure there weren't any women within earshot. The three of them were still the only customers, and the barmaid had the night off, leaving the landlord to serve the drinks alone. But even so, tall Mr. Hughes leaned in close to the others and continued confidently, we would start to become frisky. We would pay special attention to the lady alligators, if you catch my drift. That's what happens in the springtime to our plantigrade pals. Yeah. Mr. Pugh and short Mr. Hughes said nothing, but they both nodded very slightly. I suppose you're wondering what plantigrade means, aren't you? Neither of them was wondering any such thing. They were just trying, without a great deal of success, not to imagine alligators making passionate love. Yeah, this is fun. They were both content for him to carry on, though, because it was Monday and 8:15, and the quiz was due to start at 5:30, so he would be obliged to stop talking about alligators before too long. They went back to their pints of bitter as the uninvited definition of plantigrade washed over them. They're just like us, really, concluded tall Mr. Hughes. Oh yes, murmured Mr. Pugh. The similarities are endless. His gaze at last shifted away from the horse brasses, and he raised his pipe and nodded a greeting across the bar to Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships as they walked in through the far door, bringing with them a cold blast of the outside air. "Ready to be humiliated?" called Septic Barry, returning the nod. "No, but I sure hope you are," said Mr. Pugh. "We'll be wiping the floor with you a lot tonight." "We have a secret weapon." "Oh yes? What's that then? Your beard?" "No, it's not my beard." Mr. Pugh was very proud of his big black beard. He was also proud of his big round belly. "Pure brains, Bitter," he claimed. "And of the way he smoked nothing but pipe tobacco in the age of cigarettes. It's something else entirely." "Like what?" "That would be telling, wouldn't it?" Septic Barry knew, as did everyone else, that they didn't have any kind of secret weapon. The children from previous relationships hung up their coats and sat at their usual table on the public bar side of the pub as Septic Barry got the first round in from Mr. Edwards, the landlord, who had emerged from his sanctuary behind the door marked private, and begun pouring 4 pints of brains without having to be asked. The Anchor had 2 glass panels front doors, one engraved with the words lounge bar, and the other with the words public bar. But the days of different prices and different service had gone a long time ago, and the dividing wall had been taken out in the 70s. Now it was just the same pub all the way through, but each side was still referred to by its old name. In short, Mr. Hughes, Tall Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh always came in through the lounge bar door and stayed on that side of the pub, and Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships always came in through the public bar door and stayed on that side of the pub. Quite often in the winter it would just be the 7 of them, plus whoever was behind the bar, and on the very rare night when Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships were to spend a whole evening playing pool in the pub on the other side of the harbor, it would just be Tall Mr. Hughes, Short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh. In the summer, though, the village was crowded with holiday makers, and the Anchor would be packed. A lot of the time it was hard to find a place to sit or stand, and although Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships would never miss a night's drinking, the older men found themselves inclined to spend their free time looking after their vegetable patches or attending to outstanding household projects. Being married, Short Mr. Hughes and Mr. Pugh had even been known to spend evenings with their wives. On Mondays, they would turn up for quiz night no matter what, getting there early to be sure of a table. But most nights they bided their time, quietly longing for the end of the season, when the Anchor would at last become theirs again. Once they reclaimed it, it was a rare shift that didn't see the 3 of them standing together at the bar for the best part of the evening. The glasses were almost empty. "You're round, Mr. Pugh," said Mr. Hughes. Short Mr. Hughes. Mr. Pugh patted his belly and said, "I might have filled out a bit over the years, but there was no need to be personal." "Oh, I get it. Like, you're round, like, you are round, not you're round, you know? You know." They had been having this exchange word for word for years, but they smiled as Mr. Pugh drained his final mouthful and put his empty glass on the bar. They all watched Mr. Edwards as he handed Septic Barry his change and moved over to the other side of the pub, where he pulled 3 pints of brains without having to be asked. Mr. Edwards put the change for Mr. Pugh's 10-pound note on the bar as the 3 men drank the tops of their new pints and wiped the froth from their lips with their sleeve. The refrigerator had stopped its rumbling, and there was a silence between them. Tall Mr. Hughes decided to fill it. "As a matter of fact," he said, "if you look really closely, something you'll always notice about alligators is..." He was cut short when the lounge's bar door opened. It didn't open very far, but enough for Miyuki Woodward to get through. Everybody turned to look at her, and the place went quiet as they all realized it was that time of year again. The quiet didn't last long. "Back from the dead?" called Septic Barry from his seat on the other side of the pub. "Back to haunt you," she said. "It's the proverbial bad penny," said Tall Mr. Hughes, who didn't seem too upset at having been interrupted. "That's right," she said. "You can't get rid of me." "Very honorable to see you again," said Short Mr. Hughes, as she had known he would. "Very honorable to see you too," she sighed. "Welcome back, Thunderthighs." said Mr. Pugh, smiling warmly through his big black beard as he realized that maybe they would have a secret weapon after all. You've been sorely missed, you know. That's good to hear. Mr. Edward smiled in recognition of her, shook his head, and said, "Holy mackerel." She smiled back, "The usual, please." This was a test, because it had been 11.5 months. "Holy mackerel," he said again, chuckling as he reached for a pint glass and filled it with brains. He put the glass in front of her, and she gave him a £5 note. She took her change, thanked him, looked at the coins, and calculated that a pint had gone up by 5 pence, which was no more or less than she would have expected. She picked up the glass with both hands and drank the top half-inch of the beer. "See you later, then," she said to tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh. "Oh, you'll be seeing us later, Thunder Thighs," said Mr. Pugh. "Don't you worry about that." She took off her coat, draped it over a stool, and sat at the small round table in the corner of the room, underneath the stuffed pike in its glass case. She drank almost half her pint in one go and looked around. It was as if the last 50 weeks had never happened. The people were the same as when she was last there, and the pub hadn't changed at all. Septic Barry's hair was still short on top and long in the back. Coal and wood burned in the lounge bar's fireplace, and even though the dates fell on different days of the week, the January page on the brewery calendar was decorated with the same wonder-colored dray horse as the year before. As she felt herself blend into the scene, it struck her that she hadn't changed a great deal either. She was drinking what she always drank and sitting where she always sat, at the end of the bench that ran along the wall, from the back corner to the fireplace. She was wearing the same brown jumper and walking boots she had habitually worn to the pub the year before, and although her jeans were technically different from last year's, they were from the same shop, they were the exact same shade of blue, and they were just as spattered with multicolored spots of paint. Her hair was more or less the same shortish style as it had been for years, and it was pulled back from her face with a black band that she couldn't remember having bought in the interventing months. And even though she was always resolving to mend her ways, her nails were still bitten down to the quick. Precisely on cue, a horrible screech of feedback made everybody wince. The equipment had been plugged in, and tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh took their usual quiz night seats at the other end of the long bench from Yuki around the table by the fire. She left her book unopened in front of her. She knew from experience that she wouldn't be able to concentrate, but it didn't bother her because she had read most of it on the train and bus, and only had a few pages left to go. And besides, she was sure she knew who the murderer was. The quizmaster, a retired telephone engineer who was paid in pints of bitter and packets of port scratchings, had appeared with moments to spare. After turning on his amplifier and hurriedly handing out paper and pens to the contestants, he started talking into his distorted microphone. He gave a brief summary of the rules and the structure of the competition and began their first round of questions. With his coarse russet sweep, tatty beige cardigan, and relentlessly monotonous voice, there was nothing of the game show host about him. But even so, he felt his role as master of ceremonies demanded that he inject a little pizzazz into the proceedings, which he chose to do by ending every question with the sound "da." "How many chains are there in a furlong?" became "How many chains are there in a furlong?" Likewise, for what to do the construction-related initials FCB stand was posed as, for what to do the construction-related initials FCB stand. With his questions held so close to his face that they almost touched his eyeballs, and his delivery suggesting he still had difficulty reading his own handwriting, contestants were asked, what was the name of the first dog to be fired into orbit, or what was the final tally of unfortunate young men to be callously slaughtered by the London-based serial killer Dennis Nielsen? This is stupid. Anyways. Tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh huddled around their table on the lounge bar side of the pub, and Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships huddled in a haze of smoke around their table on the public bar side of the pub. To the dismay of both regular teams, 4 walkers from Usk who were staying in the rooms on the top floor had decided to join in last minute. They called themselves the 4 walkers from Usk, and they seemed unnervingly keen as they huddled around the table in between the dartboard and the cigarette machine. Yuki played along in her head, knowing some of the answers but not others, and it wasn't until the second question in the 4th round that tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh remembered she was there. As one, they turned and looked at her. The question was, what is the new name of the country that used to be called Burma? Miyuki pretended they weren't all looking at her, but she knew they were. This time it was short Mr. Hughes who approached her. Still sitting, he inched along the bench with his pint glass in hand, smiling in a way that didn't suit him. And before he could say a word, she stage whispered, Myanmar. She quietly spelled it for him. To make sure he had got it right, he repeated the spelling of Myanmar back to her. And when she nodded her approval, he winked and whispered, very honorable of you, and slid back along the bench. He passed on the information to his teammates until Mr. Hughes wrote the answer on their sheet. Something very similar to this had happened on her first evening in the village, 8 years before. She had been sitting quietly on her own underneath a stuffed pike and tried to read her book as quiz night went on around her, when she felt a presence by her side. This time it had been Mr. Pugh with his big round belly and his big black beard, who had slid along the bench. We were wondering, he said, slowly and deliberately nodding his head sideways and pouring his pipe in the direction of his teammates. Us lot. Whether or not you happen to know the answer to that last question. Miyuki said 277 miles per hour. Are you sure about that? I'm positive. That's really fast, though. You don't have to believe me if you don't want to, she smiled. It's up to you. But are you really sure? She gave him a look. Of course you're sure, he said. Silly question. Mr. Pugh's wife's friend handled the changeovers at the cottage Miyuki was renting, and she told Mr. Pugh's wife that they were expecting the arrival of somebody with a Japanese-sounding name. It was rare enough for there to be a tenant at this time of year, and rarer still for a tenant to have a Japanese-sounding name, so the women deemed this information to be worthy of mention. The news had been relayed to a half-listener, Mr. Pugh, who over that morning's breakfast table, and he had correctly deduced that the person sitting at the other end of the long bench was the one his wife had been talking about. It is fast, though, isn't it? He said. Thanks for that, Thunder Thighs. He slid back to their table, shaking his head at the thought of something so long and so heavily traveling at such a speed and leaving Miyuki feeling self-conscious about the size of her legs. She had never thought of them as being particularly big before. She had thought they were just normal. There was a time when she would have been exasperated at being asked whether or not she knew the highest recorded speed of the bullet train to within 10 miles per hour either way. She found it grating when people assumed she knew everything about Japan and that she would be glad to talk about the country, to discuss its custom and its culture at great length. It happened a lot when she was at college. She often ended up telling people that although her father was Japanese, she had never met him, and that her mother was Welsh and had moved back home when she was 5 months pregnant. She hadn't spent any time in Japan since she had been in the womb. I was in Osaka fetus, she would say, as her inquisitor shrank with embarrassment, and that's all. I'm about as Japanese as labor bread. Gradually, though, she found herself starting to acknowledge that she felt a small connection to the place. Even though her parents had parted company before she was born, and she knew almost nothing about her father, her mother had given her a Japanese name, and it was her father's genes that were in the ascendant, at least when it came to her appearance. She had Japanese eyes, a Japanese build, and Japanese coloring. She didn't look Korean or Filipino or Chinese or Vietnamese. She didn't look indeterminately East Asian. There was no escaping it. She looked Japanese. At college, Japanese students had been known to approach her and speak to her in their own language, and she would say, I'm very sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. After a short and confused conversation, she would watch them walk away and wonder, just for a moment, whether they had been a cousin or even a half-brother or sister. Over time, she began to sympathize with her interrogators. She came to the conclusion that if people wanted to talk to her about Japan, then there was no reason why they shouldn't. She had grown to realize that everybody is saddled with the curse of small talk in one way or another. Veterinary assistants trying to relax in general company are tormented with Veterinary assistants trying to relax in general company are tormented with interminable true stories of decrepit parrots, crippled badgers, and poodles with weeping sores. Off-duty plumbers trying to wind down in pubs are pestered by fellow drinkers with extensive inquiries about float valves and stopcocks. And undertakers, on revealing their profession to new acquaintances, are obliged to endure bowed heads and reverent hushes, followed by horribly sincere mutterings about how it's all such a terrible business when someone passes away. She was by no means alone, and sometimes she shriveled with shame as she found herself asking people very obvious questions that they must have been asked all the time. Her inside shrank and her toes wriggled with embarrassment whenever she realized that in clutching at conversational straws, she had crossed over to the other side, and stultifying conversation was her fault. When she read to her Carrigan of the use of When she read to her Carrigan of the existence of a Japanese dish that she was more or less identical to labor bread, she knew that the time had come at last for her to accept her millstone, and to find out at least some of the answers to the questions she was so often asked. She started watching Japanese art house films, horror movies, and anime, and television documentaries about life in Tokyo and geishas and the aftermath of Hiroshima. She borrowed travel guides and coffee table books from the library and asked her mother for manga comics for Christmas, and read books by Haruki Murakami, Yukio Mishima, and Banana, that cannot be right, Yoshimoto. She ended up amassing quite an extensive range of knowledge, and even found that her long-standing and carefully cultivated indifference towards the country had been replaced by a genuine moderate interest. So when people asked her questions about things to do with Japan, she no longer expended energy being affronted, but instead battered them with basic historical, cultural, and geographical information. If she didn't know the answer, she would make a point of finding it out and giving back to them. She learned the height of Mount Fuji, the names of the big cities and the main islands, the primary components of a sumo wrestler's diet, the ideal temperature of sake, and numbers up to 100, as well as a raft of examples of Japanese etiquette and details about the preparations and consumption of pufferfish. Until then, the only trains that had ever really captured her attention had been the handsome, snub-nosed Class 37s as they rattled up her valley on their way to the colliery and laden with coal. Defiantly lumbered their way back down, but she memorized every fact she could find about the bullet train. Okay, grabbed a pillow. Because people's curiosity didn't stop at the edge of Japanese water, she stocked up on all kinds of East Asian trivia, which she dispensed with casual generosity. She knew every capital city in the region, the length of the Great Wall of China, and the dates of its construction, the name of the official language of the Philippines, the capital of Taiwan, the key differences between Malaysia and Indonesia, and helpfully for the two Mr. Hugheses and Mr. Pugh, the name for the country that used to be called Burma. When people asked her, as they often did, whether it was true that you could buy schoolgirls' used knickers from vending machines at Tokyo subway stations, they would be told to go away and not come back until they had a sensible question. But by and large, she dealt with all inquiries as thoroughly and as politely as she could. On her first night in the pub, her answers about the bullet train, although absolutely correct, had been disallowed. From her far side of the room, Septic Barry had spotted Mr. Pugh's maneuver and complained to the quizmaster about their team receiving illegal help from a third party. It was a valid grievance, and the point was deducted. But tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh had since found a way around this difficulty. There were up to 4 players allowed on each team, and for the next week onwards, on the 2 Mondays of the year when Miyuki was in the pub, they'd put an extra pound in the pot, and though their team name remained Hughes, Pugh, Hughes, their list of members would read as it did tonight. Hughes, Pugh, Hughes, Japanese girl. And so even though Septic Barry had noticed the movement on the other side of the pub, he knew there was nothing that he or any of the children from previous relationships could do about it, apart from pull faces and curse under their breath. Her name was on the sheet, and that was that. Miyuki was tired after her early start and her train and bus journeys. She could feel her eyelids starting to droop, and after the final question, she decided not to hang around as the quizmaster tallied the scores. She already knew they weren't going to win the round of beer. On quiet nights, tall Mr. Hughes, short Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Pugh had been known to lurch to victory. But the 4 walkers from Usk had looked like retired school teachers, and when the scores had been read out after the 5th and penultimate round, they were ahead by an unassailable distance. Septic Barry and the children from previous relationships were already quite happily resigned to their defeat. The only time they had ever won was when Flu had been sweeping through the village, and having somehow escaped the bug, they were the only team to turn up. They had claimed their round of beer after scoring just 12 points out of a possible 60. Miyuki took her glass back to the bar and said goodnight to her teammates. "Goodnight," she said to tall Mr. Hughes. "Be good," he said. "You too, good night," she said to short Mr. Hughes. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," he said. I won't, she wondered what she would be restricting herself to if she truly meant it. She thought she might try it as an experiment one day. "Good night," she said to Mr. Pugh. "Sweet dreams under thighs," he said, raising his pipe before relighting it again. She raised her hand to Mr. Edwards, who nodded back, and to Septic Barry, who lifted his glass in return and said, "Good to have you back." She smiled. It was good to be back. Back at the cottage, she had put some kindling and 2 small logs into the wood stove. There was still a patch of embers from the fire she had lit when she arrived, and the wood was so dry it caught after just a few blows. Some cold ash blew up her nose, and she sneezed her first sneeze since leaving home that morning. She turned on Radio 3 and half listened to a contemporary Romanian madrigal as she licked her fingers and plucked out her contact lenses. She dropped little pieces of plastic onto the top of the stove and watched as they hissed and danced the mambo. Before long, they ran out of steam and lay still, a pair of glossy lentils. She turned off the radio, and as she read the last few pages of her book, she found that the murderer wasn't who she thought it was after all, and felt a bit stupid for having missed so many clues and fallen for so many red herrings. She brushed her teeth and climbed into bed, where she wriggled out of her clothes and dropped them onto the floor, and pulled on the long johns and long-sleeved t-shirt that would be her pajamas for the coming fortnight. Before the 4 walkers from Usk had reached the bottoms of their winter pints, Miyuki was asleep, with nothing in particular to worry about and nobody to elbow her in the back. She slept very well. That was 20 pages. But I love you very much, and I hope you're asleep. And if you're not, that's okay too.